30 seconds changed American history. A hijacker jumped from a plane and vanished. He demanded $200,000, 4 parachutes, and somehow kept everyone completely calm. Then, somewhere over the Pacific Northwest, Cooper opened the rear stairs and jumped into the night. 50 years later, the FBI still has no confirmed body, no confirmed identity, and no final answer. He vanished into the darkness, and more than 50 years later, America still doesn't know what happened to him. If you love history, war, and incredible true stories, subscribe and share this video. Now, let's begin the story.
November 24th, 1971. It was 8:13 p.m. A man was sitting quietly aboard Northwest Orient Flight 305. Then, he handed a flight attendant a small piece of folded paper. At first, she didn't even read it. She thought it was probably just a simple message from an ordinary passenger. But the man leaned toward her and said, "Read the note." She opened it, and suddenly, everything changed. The note said he had a bomb. A few moments later, the man opened his briefcase and showed her what appeared to be 8 sticks of dynamite. Or at least, that's what they looked like. Then, he calmly made his demands. 4 parachutes, $200,000 in cash, and a fuel truck waiting for the aircraft in Seattle. In today's money, that $200,000 would be worth well over $1 million. But the strangest part wasn't the money. It wasn't even the bomb. It was the man himself. He wasn't screaming. He wasn't panicking. He wasn't acting desperate. He was completely calm, almost unnervingly calm. And within a few hours, what happened next would become one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in American history. Because that man was about to jump from a Boeing 727 into the darkness of the Pacific Northwest. And then he would disappear. No confirmed body, no confirmed identity, no final confession. And to this day, nobody has been able to prove exactly what happened to him. His ticket carried the name Dan Cooper, but the world would remember him by another name, D.B. Cooper. The story began on the day before Thanksgiving. America was entering one of its busiest travel periods of the year. At Portland International Airport in Oregon, an ordinary-looking man boarded Northwest Orient Flight 305. The plane was headed for Seattle. He wore a dark suit, a white shirt, and a black tie. He looked like an ordinary businessman. Nothing about him immediately suggested danger. He purchased a one-way ticket under the name Dan Cooper. Then he took seat 18C. There weren't many passengers aboard the aircraft that evening. For the first few minutes, everything was completely normal. Then, Cooper handed a folded piece of paper to a flight attendant. She placed it in her purse. She didn't read it. Cooper leaned toward her. "Read the note." She opened it, and that's when she learned that the man sitting nearby claimed to have a bomb. Cooper then opened his briefcase. Inside were wires, batteries, and several objects that appeared to be sticks of dynamite. The flight attendant was terrified, but Cooper remained completely calm. He gave her his demands: 4 parachutes, $200,000, and a fuel truck waiting at the Seattle airport. The aircraft continued toward Seattle, but nobody on the ground yet knew what kind of night was beginning. When the plane reached Seattle, the FBI and local authorities quickly assembled the ransom money. The passengers were allowed to leave. One by one, they walked down the stairs, but Cooper stayed aboard. Now he had the money, he had the parachutes, and he had something even more important, a Boeing 727. Cooper ordered the crew to prepare the aircraft for another flight. His destination was Mexico. But there was a problem. The aircraft didn't have enough fuel to fly that far without stopping, so Cooper ordered the plane to stop in Reno for refueling. The aircraft was prepared for another departure. By now, Cooper appeared to have complete control of the situation, but he made one unusual request. He wanted the rear staircase of the Boeing 727 to remain available during flight. That small detail would later become one of the most important pieces of the entire mystery.
At approximately 7:40 p.m., Flight 305 took off from Seattle. Inside the aircraft were only Cooper, the flight crew, and the ransom money. Outside was almost complete darkness. It was raining, the wind was strong, and the temperature was freezing. The aircraft climbed higher into the night. Cooper sat quietly near the rear of the plane. A parachute was beside him. The ransom money was secured to his body. Then, something extraordinary happened. The rear staircase of the Boeing 727 began moving downward. Powerful winds rushed into the aircraft. The plane shifted slightly. The crew realized what Cooper was doing. He was preparing to jump. Below him was the vast, dark landscape of the Pacific Northwest. Forests, rivers, mountains, and almost no lights anywhere. The crew waited. And then, Cooper disappeared into the darkness. There was no explosion, no gunfire, no final speech, just a man stepping out of a flying airplane and vanishing into the night. The aircraft continued toward Reno, and when it arrived, one thing was immediately clear. Cooper was gone. The FBI launched one of the largest searches in American history. Agents searched enormous areas of Washington state. They searched forests, riverbanks, roads, abandoned buildings. They questioned countless people. They analyzed the weather conditions, and they examined the aircraft itself. But there was one enormous problem. Nobody knew exactly where Cooper had landed. The parachute could have carried him miles away from the predicted landing area. The weather was terrible, the terrain was extremely difficult, and Cooper had disappeared into a huge, dark region where finding one person would be almost impossible. Days passed, then weeks. Weeks became months. Still no Cooper, no body, no confirmed evidence. Then, in 1980, something strange happened. A young boy named Brian Ingram was walking with his family along the Columbia River.
Suddenly, he discovered something buried beneath the sand. 3 packets. Inside were $20 bills. Investigators later determined that the serial numbers matched Cooper's ransom money. The total amount was approximately $5,800. It was the only significant portion of the ransom ever recovered, and suddenly, the mystery became even deeper. If Cooper survived, where was the rest of the money? If he died, where was his body? And if he really escaped, where did he go? For decades, hundreds of people claimed they knew who D.B. Cooper really was. The FBI investigated countless suspects. Some were former military personnel, some were experienced parachutists, others had mysterious backgrounds. One suspect attracted particular attention. His name was Richard Floyd McCoy. Just months after Cooper disappeared, McCoy hijacked an aircraft. His method was remarkably similar. He demanded money, he used parachutes, and he escaped from the aircraft. Some investigators wondered, could McCoy actually have been D.B. Cooper? But there were problems. Witness descriptions didn't completely match McCoy's appearance, and other evidence pointed in different directions. Then other suspects appeared. Some claimed on their deathbeds that they were the famous hijacker, but none of those confessions produced enough evidence to solve the case, and the mystery remained. There is another strange detail in this story. The man never actually called himself D.B. Cooper. His ticket was purchased under the name Dan Cooper. The name D.B. became famous because of a reporting error, but somehow that incorrect name survived, and eventually it became one of the most famous names in American criminal history. But who was the man behind it? The FBI believed Cooper probably had some knowledge of aviation. He understood parachutes, he knew how to remain calm under pressure, and he appeared to know enough about the Boeing 727 to understand that its rear staircase could be used while the aircraft was in flight. That suggests planning. But one enormous question remained. Could he actually have survived the jump? It was the middle of the night, the weather was bad, he was wearing ordinary clothes, and the parachute he used wasn't necessarily ideal for a jump like this. If he landed somewhere in the wilderness, his chances of survival may have been very low. But if he survived, he could have disappeared into ordinary American life. Maybe he changed his name, maybe he left the country, or maybe he quietly lived out the rest of his life knowing that millions of people were still searching for him. Nobody knows. For decades, the FBI continued investigating. Finally, in 2016, after more than 40 years of investigation, the FBI officially ended its active investigation. But the mystery didn't end, because one question still remains. What happened to D.B. Cooper? Did he die somewhere in the dark wilderness of the Pacific Northwest that November night? Did the Columbia River swallow the evidence? Or did he survive and disappear into ordinary American society? Or perhaps, did he actually escape with most of the money and then spend the rest of his life knowing that millions of people were still looking for him? We may never know. There is no confirmed photograph of him after the hijacking, no confirmed grave, no verified confession, and no definitive proof of his true identity. Today, all we have are fragments, a plane ticket, a ransom, a parachute, several $1,000s discovered years later, and one impossible story of disappearance. On November 24, 1971, a man boarded an airplane under the name Dan Cooper. A few hours later, he jumped into the darkness with a parachute, and somewhere between the sky and the ground, D.B. Cooper vanished. More than half a century later, America is still asking the same question. Who was he? And perhaps the most haunting possibility is this. Maybe the real question isn't where D.B. Cooper died. Maybe the real question is whether he ever died at all.